Yay! Welcome to another GraphQL Meetup. I'm taking it we're live now. I'm Alex Banks. You can find me at Moon Tahoe. This meetup is also brought to you by Moon Highway, which is me and Eve Porcello. You can find her at Eve Porcello on Twitter. And welcome. This is an exciting week. I'm really happy that you came to join us. So this is a GraphQL Meetup that's brought to you by Moon Highway and this.labs. We're located in Tahoe City, California. And we make training materials. So we have courses on LinkedIn, courses on Egghead.io. We've written a couple books on GraphQL and React for O'Reilly. And our next meetup is going to be August 4th. So we will have a GraphQL meetup on August 4th with Khalil Stimler from Apollo. So he's going to be talking about Apollo Client 3, which is the latest Apollo client. So put that in your calendars. I hope to see you there too. So today's meetup, we're going to be talking about authorization, authentication with AuthGraph. And our special guest speaker is Sean Grove. He's the founder of OneGraph. And these are the new features that he has for authorization built into the OneGraph platform. So just in interest of time and making this meetup the most about learning, we're going to go ahead and get going here. Feel free to drop any questions in the chat, and at the end of this session, I will pick several questions to ask Sean about his talk and about the platform. So without further ado, let's go ahead and pass this off to Sean.
Thank you very much. Definitely appreciate it.
Yay.
Cool. So let me go ahead and start by saying that, I really like programming. I like building apps and services until it comes to time to put in auth. And it's just like running through this brick wall of fun, right? Where as soon as you have to implement auth or consume auth, it's just a total nightmare. And so often I find if you have one of these pains, the best thing to do is just to embrace the pain, go super deep, and hopefully solve it in a way so that you never have to deal with that pain again. So Auth Guardian is kind of the result of that. Where I had this thought of, I can often express the requirements for authentication or authorization in my app relatively easily. Right? I can say, for example, I want a user to be able to sign in with GitHub. I want them to be able to sign in with Spotify. And that makes sense to me, but turning that into code is a lot of effort. And even then, authentication is relatively easy kind of compared to something like authorization, right? Authentication is just, who are you? Authorization is much more challenging. It's what are you allowed to do? And what you're allowed to do on, say, my Apollo server depends on certain facts about you, right? Are you a member of my GitHub organization? Are you the owner of a Salesforce account? Are you signed into Spotify? So what happens usually is whenever we're implementing authorization, we have a user sign in, and then we have to go and check a bunch of facts about them all across the internet. And that usually ends up requiring lots and lots of effort with different APIs and whatnot. And it'd be really nice if we could just say, for example, listen, if you are a member of my GitHub organization, then I'm going to go ahead and give you an admin role. If you have contributed to my repository, then I'm going to go ahead and make you a moderator on our forum, that kind of thing. So that's what the design goal of Auth Guardian was, to kind of try to simplify a lot of these rules. So I'll go ahead and just start with a new rule. And you can say, see here that we support lots of different services for a user to sign in. And each service kind of has its own set of rules that you can specify about a user who logs in. And what happens is whenever a user signs into any of these services, Salesforce, Spotify, Gmail, GitHub, whatever it might be, we're going to run each of the rules. And each rule that passes, we're going to just start building up this little JSON payload for you that will sign and create a JWT at the end. And so to give an example of that, we'll say, for example, on GitHub, if your login status is true, if you are logged in, then what I want to do is in the JSON, I want to set something like user.name to a built-in value. And these are the kind of the facts about you that exist out on the internet. So for example, maybe your GitHub name. And you can see over here, it's going to give me a preview actually of what this JWT looks like based off of my information and what I'm logged into right now. So you can see I'm logged into GitHub and it's generating this rule right here. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this. And you can see that if the user isn't logged in, they're only going to have kind of the bare minimum fields required for a JWT. But let's go ahead and add that back in. And once I've logged in, it'll repopulate. And I probably want a few more things, right? So I want something like maybe the user.id is going to be a built-in value of something like the GitHub user ID. And you can see like now I'm starting to build up this user profile, whereas if a user signs in with GitHub, then I'm going to get this information. And maybe I want to add, for example, if they log into Spotify. So if their login status is true, then I'll do the same thing where I say user.Spotify email is going to be their Spotify email. And I'm not logged into Spotify, so let's go ahead and change that. So we'll log into Spotify. And once I give it access, you can see that it fills it out. So I was kind of able to say, like, add in the login rules, the authorization rules and authentication rules, like relatively quickly. So maybe what I want to do now is say on GitHub, for example, if you're a member of my organization, so we'll call it OneGraph, AuthGuardian also understands how to add roles for different starts or types of servers. So for example, on Apollo, maybe I want to make you an admin. So we'll go ahead and add that in there. And now this will just automatically work where you can actually annotate, and we'll see how to do this in just a few minutes. You can just annotate your SDL for your GraphQL and just say this field requires that you have an admin role. Likewise, on Hasura, I'm going to set your default role to admin. And you can see it pops up here. And let's add another one, like Salesforce. So on Salesforce, if you're logged in and you have an email with a domain that's equal to onegraph.com, then what I'm going to do is on Netlify, I'm going to give you a role of sales. So go ahead and add this in. And any luck, this will work well. And there we go. Okay, so now you can see that it actually knows how to add roles for Netlify, for Hasura, for Apollo. I can add other ones, so maybe make you an admin as well. Add another effect here and say, if you're on Express.js, I'll give you sales as well. So you can see here that I'm able to add in all these different rules, which express lots and lots of different complex authorization rules that give you the ability to create one single token that works for login for all sorts of different services and will also work for different servers like Apollo and Express or NextJS or whatnot. So this looks good. I'll go ahead and save this. And now what happens is anytime a user logs in to any service, all these rules are going to run for them, and I'm going to get a token that looks something like this. And if I want to install this in one of my apps, so I'll use it with Hasura, Express, Porcello. We can use it. We have all these sorts of different starter kits. But what I have here is kind of the to-do MVC of Apollo that's just set up to use AuthGuardian already. And I'll kind of show how that looks like to start out with. So to start with, you just take a normal Apollo server, and we have a couple of auth packages that you install. So we have this OneGraph Apollo server auth, and just give it your app ID, and we'll take it from there. So what happens is every app on OneGraph has a set of JWTs. So I'll show you what this looks like. So this is my app ID. So we'll do app. You can see here that they have what's called a JWK. And this is enough to be able to actually grab the signature for any given JWT and make sure that it's actually verified. So like there's lots of like really difficult work that goes into generating all of that. But whenever it comes to consume it, you literally just say, look, here's my OneGraph app ID. And now I have a function that will get given a JWT. We'll actually make sure that its signature is correct. And it will pop it inside of the context of Apollo. So right now, I don't have any fields kind of reserved inside of my Apollo server. So let's go ahead and change that. So you can see here, this is my set of type defs. So I have my to-dos and mutations and whatnot. And currently, I can see all of the different to-dos that are just inside of the server. But what I want to do is actually make it so that to come in here, actually to read any of these fields, you actually have to be authenticated. And the way that works is it's going to look for your user.id inside of the JWT. So you have to have logged into some service, and the rules have to have passed to have given a user.id, and you have to have a JWT that has been signed in a way that hasn't been tampered with by the user. So once I do that, let me go ahead and run this. You can see that now it's not giving me any of the to-dos because I'm not signed in. That said, if I sign in now, I am authenticated. So let me go ahead and sign in with, for example, GitHub. And just as a heads up, you probably shouldn't do pop-up windows in response to a select. Safari likes to block those. Okay, so now that I've done that, you can see that it's giving me a preview of what my token looks like. So you can see I have all these rules in here. And it's showing me all of the to-dos. But what I want to do is actually make it so that you can only see the to-dos that belong to your user.id. So let's go in here, and in our resolvers, you can see currently I just pull out all of the to-dos. But instead of that, let's go ahead and say, let's only return the to-dos where the user ID of the to-do is the same as the one that's inside of the JWT. So I'll hit save on that. Let me restart my server. And now whenever I refresh, you can see that one of them has gone away. And that's because inside of here, my user ID on GitHub, which is a permanent unchanging ID, is this 35296, which I think is positively correlated with age. So kind of giving away my age there. But if I pop this over here and I refresh, you can see that now it comes in here. So I'm able to just kind of come in here and add both authorization and authentication really, really easily. Similarly, if I wanted to make it so that, for example, inside of here that you could only get to a delete to do. If you were a admin, you could do something like has a role, which is you have to have at least the role of admin, for example. And that's literally all it takes. You can see in here that I have a role of admin for Hasura and for Apollo, so this would work here. And as I said, this same token will actually work for something like Hasura. It will also work for Netlify. So you can actually combine all of your different auth needs into one simple token, and then adding auth on the front end literally just looks something like, I'll show what the login code here looks like. Where all I did was just list all of the supported services inside of OneGraph. And whenever it gets selected, I just do an auth login, and I just wait to see if the user is logged in or not. And if it is, then I go ahead and save the cookie locally. So like with something like 10 lines of code, you can actually add login to, I think, more than 30-something services on your front end. And then with another 10 lines of code, you can add authentication and authorization to your server on the back end. And I'll show a few other things. So just to show you that this is actually also, the same thing works inside of NextJS. So that same token is going to work over here. You can see I'm just enumerating all of the different services. If I log into it, it'll populate the JWT. And you can use the same token to actually require that someone be logged in to access different pages on your NextJS app, that they have an admin role to get into different pages. And you can actually use that same token once you have logged into all of this stuff to interact with those upstream APIs. So for example, in this case, I'm going to go ahead and come over here and log into GitHub on my Next.js app. And now I'm going to go and submit some feedback. I'm going to say quick demo for GraphQL Meetup. So that same JWT that shows me that I'm logged in, I can also use to run a query. And this is actually going to submit some feedback. And if I come over here, you can see that other people have actually already opened up feedback on here, which has been actually attaches the feedback that they give, as well as the metadata in terms of how are they feeling, their username, their emotion, that kind of thing. So with one token, again, you can add user sign-in for all these different services, GitHub, Spotify, Salesforce, etc. You can then use that token for authentication and authorization on Apollo, Hasura, Netlify. But you can also use that token to actually interact with those APIs whenever you're doing integration. So if you need to create a Zendesk ticket or a Stripe customer or whatever it might be, this is the way to do it. One other fun thing about this is the way that this UI is actually generated is a little bit crazy. So let me go ahead and open up GraphQL and see if I can show you. But we actually, yeah, so let's see here. So if we look at, like, for example, one graph. Let's see if I can do it in here. All right, so let's do one graph, auth guardian preview. So you can see that we have all these rules. Let's do mutation, one graph, auth guardian. I should have prepared this one better. Let's see if I can find it. User email one graph. I'll skip that. But the idea is actually, the way that this works is each of these is actually part of the GraphQL schema, where we do an introspection schema against the server and say, hey, for Auth Guardian, what fields do you have? And one of them might be GitHub, Gmail, whatever. And whenever we open up GitHub, we say, well, what fields does that GraphQL object have? And we render these. And so that way we actually implement the rules once on the back end. And then we're able to go ahead and automatically generate the UI from that. So we only have one source of truth for the UI. So we actually use GraphQL to generate all of these rules and generate all of the UI. And then when the time comes to actually go ahead and use this in production, if you need to, if you start out with this and you specify all of your rules like we have here, you may eventually outgrow it, right? You may need to do something super advanced where you need to interact with your database or whatnot. And what we actually do here is offer you the ability to export these rules. So this is also, not only is it generated from GraphQL, but it is generating GraphQL. So for example, if we come back here and build in that, Stripe, we'll say login status is true. Then we'll say user dot is making money is some JSON that will hard code to true. And you can see here that it actually generates, it walks over all of your rules and generates a single GraphQL query that will retrieve all of the data you need in here. So for example, maybe we also want to set the user.stripe email to be the Stripe account primary email. And you can see here that because of that, it has actually added this rule here. Similarly, we actually generate a full JavaScript function that will take the results of that GraphQL query and build the exact same JWT. So whenever the time comes, if you need to actually graduate from these sets of rules, you're not really locked into this UI, because we can just take that GraphQL query that we generate and just compile out a single GraphQL query in JavaScript that you can kind of take and run in a serverless function in a webhook if you need to. And then I'll show off one last fun example, a feature that we haven't released yet, but is coming soon, which is, for a lot of small companies, metrics like mixed panel and segment and whatnot are not super useful. You simply don't have enough users to actually be able to derive, A/B test or follow trends or that kind of thing. And what that means is actually every user who signs up initially is incredibly important, and you really want to know as much about them as possible. And since we actually can populate these JWTs with user emails very, very easily, what you can do is actually, in this new feature called Slack Informer, is just tell us, hey, inside of the JWT, here are some places where I think interesting emails are. And if you find an email in there, then what I want you to do is go enrich that email and find out as much information as you can, and then go ahead and post it inside of Slack. So in this case, I've set this up so that as soon as I come in here and I log into GitHub, it finds my email and it actually posts a enriched profile inside of Slack. So you can see here that it has, my name, my title, my location, how many followers I have on Twitter. It has my LinkedIn profile, the company I work for, our revenue, employees, that kind of thing. And so this way, like whenever you're building an application where there's an Apollo server or a NextJS app, you simply add this in, you get your auth done, but also you can flip a switch and start to get to know your users as they're coming in. And it makes it really easy to know that, hey, this person works at Reddit and they're the head of design. They're probably going to be interested in this kind of thing. Maybe we should reach out and talk to them and see if they want us to build on that kind of feature. So that's kind of the overall whirlwind view of how we use GraphQL to actually generate all the user profiles, so rules like authorization and whatnot, to generate a single token that you can then use to protect your GraphQL server. And then whenever you're ready, you can actually generate a GraphQL query from that if you need to eject, and then how we tie all the services together. So that's kind of like one token to rule them all, if that makes sense.
Oh, cool. Hey, feel free to ask any questions that you want of Sean and Auth Guardian within the chat. I just have a quick question for you that might send you on a little bit of a tangent here, but we have people of all levels at GraphQL. Some people are using OneGraph. Some people aren't using OneGraph. There are some people who are looking at this and they're like, oh, sweet, I could do authorization with OneGraph. But let's say this is your first time seeing OneGraph. Could you walk us through real quick how we would just set up a new app so that we could play with these authorization features from like the home screen, so that the people who are sort of new to GraphQL can kind of get started playing around with OneGraph and setting up authorization themselves?
Yeah, sure. So I think probably the easiest way is, if you're into hipster stuff, you can use kind of Vercel and Next.js. So the install in your app, for example, if we click on the Next.js, it'll actually take us into this importing setup, where this will actually set up an entire Next.js Auth Guardian app from scratch without having to do any coding. So go ahead and say GraphQL Meetup. And deploy that. And so depending on how you want to get started, we basically just have starter kits that say, I'm using Apollo and I just want to know the bare minimums, right? I already have Apollo set up for me in my company. And I just want to know, how do I add Auth Guardian to that? And in that case, there's a OneGraph Apollo server auth example. Yeah, so we have this OneGraph Apollo server auth example, and it's tiny. It's literally just 2 files, and just kind of shows, if you check this up, you'll have a working Apollo server that has authentication, authorization, JWT, signatures. Everything is just kind of in there. So if you're starting something new, you can just take this and start tweaking on it and just kind of building on top of it. Or if you're working on something that is already advanced and in production and whatnot, you want to add this, then you can simply just pluck out the couple of lines, pop them in, and you're kind of good to go. So whether you want to use it on the server, on the Apollo, Next.js, Create React app, we're just going to have little starter kits that'll get you going.
Oh yeah, that's great. Sweet. Are there any questions about OneGraph, Auth Guardian, authorization with OneGraph?
My question hasn't come in yet, but I have one. So let's see. I need to read it myself. So Sean, I'm wondering, how did you start building this product? We get so many questions in our classes about how does auth work, and people find it to be a huge stumbling block. And I think this could help out a lot. How did that come about over at OneGraph?
Yeah, so if you think about, so there are actually several problems I think that look like they are separate kinds of problems. And what happens is if you find the right way to slice it, then it turns out they're all the same problem. And React was kind of like this in many ways, right? Where we had like, how do you do templating and how do you do logics in your template and all this kind of stuff. And then they were like, no, just use JavaScript. Like it just solves all these things. And similarly, I think, we built this graph, and the goal of one graph is to have all of the internet in one graph. And that means that it becomes really easy to say, this fact about Sean, his list of GitHub organizations is this GraphQL query. And that's much easier than having to know, well, how do we interact with the GitHub API? How do we do authorization? What's the endpoint and whatnot? And so once you have that kind of underlying graph, then building something like Auth Guardian becomes much, much easier. And actually, we have this power underneath already. So we already had this ability to just kind of on every login, run this query, and then give me a signed JWT with the result. And I kind of realized when I was talking with the Netlify folks that we could just build a kind of a GUI on top of that. And just something you can kind of click around and specify your rules in a way that a human could look at it. And it wasn't 10 pages of code of saying, make this API call, check for this flag, do this kind of thing. It was just kind of something readable. And then the reason I built it this way was because, generating it based off the GraphQL schema was largely because I was afraid that if I added something on the back end, I might forget to add it on the front end. And so I really wanted to kind of push that down as much as possible so that, one graph schema was just the source of truth and everything could be derived from it. So, the idea was actually authorization, the facts about you, authentication, access to like well-structured data. Those are all kind of the same problems.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. Are there any secret new APIs that are coming next to OneGraph, or?
Well, we actually have some Mux. We've been working with them. They will be doing some pretty exciting stuff where you can build kind of like a streamable clone almost just by clicking around. It's completely crazy. We have also like Salesforce subscription has been one that I've been really excited about because Salesforce is, I showed logging into Salesforce in here, but that's just days and days of work just to get to that point. And then to do something like subscriptions is you have to learn like their custom Apex language and install database triggers. And it goes so deep. It's such a rabbit hole. And then, to be able to actually simplify this down to the point where you can just kind of click your way through and use a GraphQL subscription and just hit play and just have data streaming in, and it brings a tear to my eye. So maybe WebSockets is the fun thing, right? Like our subscriptions in GraphQL typically were webhooks before. And we added WebSocket supports recently. And my co-founder actually wrote this. I'll put it in the chat real quick. I want to share that with everyone. What this does is this is actually using a WebSocket connection to the NPM API. And as packages are published on NPM, they become obstacles that you have to jump over inside of the Dyno run. Yeah, and so this is actually just streaming NPM package information over. So you can see there's a package right there that was just deployed. And if you hit one, then you'll die, and it'll tell you, hey, you got hit by this package right here. Right, and like it's like a really cool thing to be able to take GitHub subscriptions or NPM or Salesforce or Twitter and just kind of simplify them down into this one consumable thing. And that's the other reason about Auth Guardian. It's just like, it's really cool whenever you see that data, but then if you have to spend like a week or something like trying to figure out how to get the OAuth tokens or API tokens or whatnot, you just kind of lose all of the momentum and it feels terrible. So I really wanted to just make all of that go away so you could focus on like this Dyno package thing was literally less than 20 minutes to put together.
Wow.
That's so awesome.
We do have a question here, and Conrad is asking, does Auth Guardian work well with Apollo Federation?
Yeah, I actually think it works extremely well because if you think about Apollo Federation has kind of two levels of challenges. One is that even inside of your network, you need to figure out who is the identity provider, right? Like, how do I know? So someone makes a query to Federation forwards that to some other microservice. how does that microservice know how to check the user ID or what the user is allowed to do or that kind of thing? And like they really don't, you don't want to have that logic locally attached to the microservice. You just want to have that kind of centralized, right, in federation. So being able to specify your rules in one place, and then federation can just go ahead and verify the JWT and then forward it to everyone, and then you're good to go, which is a really nice, you can just get rid of that very quickly. But then in the future, it becomes even more important because that identity provider is talking about, inside of your organization, what is this individual allowed to do, right? What are they allowed to access and what's their ID and that kind of thing. But at some point, federation is going to start pulling in GitHub's API, and it's going to start pulling in OneGraph, and it's going to start pulling in other APIs. And at that point, your JWT is going to be really, really difficult to generate, right? Because you want to actually call GitHub on behalf of the user who's logged in. But where do you get your GitHub token from? And so being able to actually pack all of that together in one single token so that, you've stitched in GitHub's API, and now you can actually join against your local microservice and GitHub's API with that one token is like, that's so challenging to try to do outside of something like Auth-Guardian.
Yeah, that's interesting too, because, to an extent, OneGraph itself uses all sorts of services. So it's like that's baked into everything that you do. So
exactly, yeah. So that's it kind of just falls out of that. So that's it was kind of a nice feature. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Are there any other questions that we have for Sean and Auth-Guardian and OneGraph?
Well, I think the question is, when do we get to Moon Highway Egghead course on Auth-Guardian? I assume that's coming out soon, right?
Actually, I'll talk to you about that, Sean. Because it may be folded into something. Yeah, we'll talk. All
right, very cool. Very cool. All right, yeah. Anyway, I mean, it was. I know that was like a very dense presentation that talked about lots of stuff, but I definitely appreciate having me on here so I can actually share it all.
Yeah, thank you so much. We're excited to check that out. And if you haven't looked at OneGraph before, go to the website and check out how to log in, and you'll be blown away. So thank you so much, Sean. I'll switch your screen, Alex, if you want to go over those end slides.
Yeah, and I want to thank you for attending this month's meetup. Again, we can find us on Twitter at Moon Tahoe or Eve Porcello. And we also have a mailing list. If you want to join our mailing list and hear about when trainings are coming out and whatnot, you can find us at bit.ly/moonhighway. So also, I would like to remind you that next month is, what was it, August 4th?
August 4th, yeah, I was muted.
August 4th. And we're going to be talking about the Apollo Client 3. So I'm glad to see. I look forward to seeing you there.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Sean. See you guys
next time.
Bye.
Bye.